I'm Lea Lane, an award-winning travel writer and author of Places I Remember, Tales, Truths, Delights from 100 Countries. On this podcast, we share conversations with travelers about fascinating destinations and memorable experiences around the world. Places I Remember emphasizes the word places, but I like travel-themed shows too. In episode 6, I talked with the CEO of the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance about endangered wildlife around the world. In episode 12, I spoke with public relations guru Florence Quinn about traveling green. And in upcoming episodes, we're talking about resilience in travel and life with a geologist who summited Mount Everest and with an expedition leader in Antarctica. In this episode, our travel theme is important, relevant, and I know will be enlightening. What it's like traveling when you're a person of color. And later, we'll discuss where to go in America to learn more about the American Black experience. Our guests are Lezlie Bishop, a fierce advocate and a retired teacher and public relations professional. Her son is actor Stephen Bishop. You've seen him in movies including Moneyball, and his most recent TV role is in the popular series Run the World. Like his mom, Stephen is also an activist. Welcome, Lezlie and Stephen.
Thank you. Hi.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, I want to thank you especially for sharing this important topic with us. I'm watching an extraordinary Netflix show called Underground Railroad. It reminds me that the first Black travelers in America were those escaping slavery to go north, staying at safe houses along the way. And 100 years after emancipation, Black travelers were still seeking safe houses and places to eat and sleep. Lezlie, you and I both grew up under Jim Crow laws in the South. You experienced the inequities, but I grew up in Florida in the 1940s and 50s and lived in Georgia in the 1960s, and I observed it. As a white child, I was confused. I drank from the colored water fountains, thinking they were red or green or blue. I sat in the back of the bus, not fully understanding that Black passengers couldn't sit in the front. And I wasn't really aware that restaurants were segregated and that Black travelers in many parts of the country couldn't sleep in hotels where white people slept or even use the bathrooms in rest stops along the roads. A recent Oscar-nominated movie, One Night in Miami, shows that even boxing champ Muhammad Ali, then named Cassius Clay, and his celebrity Black friends could not stay in a hotel in Miami Beach in the 1960s when I was living there. So I want to ask you, Lezlie, as a proud Black woman, what was it like for you moving around and traveling during Jim Crow?
Well, Lea, I was born and raised in the North, born to a multicultural family. So I wasn't really experienced with the South in terms of water fountains and bathrooms and things like that. So in a lot of ways, I was just as naive as this group of students that I joined in 1964 from Ripon College, which is in Wisconsin. My psychology professor, I was a psych major, and my professor decided that his students needed to understand what was happening. So we did a road trip to Jackson, Mississippi. We were participating in an exchange program with Tougaloo College. So they sent 5 of their students to our campus and we drove down to Jackson. Let's just say I learned a lot in that. It didn't help that I was the only Black student. Well, first of all, I was the only Black female student on the campus at the time. And then so there were no other Black people to go with us in this trip. So I was one of one and the others were white boys, actually. I was the only woman too. We were followed by state police once we passed Illinois. From state to state, we were followed constantly. And even when we stopped for bathroom breaks, which was also quite an experience, I'll talk about later. So that began the Odyssey, and it goes from there.
Wow.
That was my first real experience with overt racism. I will tell you about real racism after a while.
Okay. There was another Oscar-nominated movie made a few years ago about something called the Green Book, which is a guidebook which let people of color know where they could safely eat or relieve themselves or spend the night all around the United States. Did you ever use the Green Book?
I never heard of the Green Book until this movie came out, to be honest. Like I said, I was a Northerner. We distanced ourselves a lot from everything that was going on in the South. When I say we, I don't mean me personally. I mean my family. So there were things that we just wouldn't do. Keep in mind, too, that the people in the Great Migration who were coming up during that period of time from the South following the railroad lines, most of our immigrants were from Mississippi. They experienced a lot of discrimination from Northern Black people. We did not want to be mistaken for people who just literally got off the boat or got off the train from Mississippi. So there was a lot of that. So the Green Book never came into my consciousness at all.
Well, did you have any frightening or dangerous experiences in your travels up north at all?
On the regular, but not dangerous so much as frightening. I'll give you an example. The custom, which was probably familiar to you too, the custom when you went to a prom was to go out to dinner afterward with your posse, with your group of friends. And the one thing, I was in charge of planning that activity, and I had to call around the city of Chicago to ask if they would serve Negroes. There was no way you could just walk into a restaurant in the city of Chicago and assume that you were going to be seated. There would never be one word exchanged in terms of, we don't serve Black people or Negroes. There would be a mistake in the reservation. There would be suddenly something came, anything but saying we don't serve Negroes, but that would be the issue. So you learn to plan ahead.
Yeah, dog whistles. Whistles, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there was a recent piece in USA Today written by a Black reporter named Rita Omoka, and she expressed concerns about recently traveling solo across America. She checked in with her family every night. She gave them Apple Maps of all her locations. She avoided gas stations in small towns, especially at night. She never drove overnight or walked down dark streets. And she even set a timer to remind herself to move along in case it would get too late. So I think today we're still having situations, obviously, for men and women. But Stephen, since George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement, we've become even more aware of the dangers of even jogging or driving for Black men. You're a familiar face to many, but what have been your experiences while traveling in the U.S. and abroad?
I've had kind of different lives as a baseball player. I had one life where we traveled to a lot of small towns and everywhere from Idaho to Minnesota to up in Canada and around, the Dakotas and places like that. And then as an actor, bigger places like New York City, Atlanta, obviously here in Los Angeles. My experiences have been pretty good in both regards. The reputations of certain places are what put anxiety in you as a person of color. As an actor, I don't spend a lot of time out of my my living arrangement, whether it be a hotel or an apartment, just because I tend to try to stay focused when I'm on location, and I don't want to, when you're out working, 14-hour days, it's difficult to want to go out and do much of anything other than come home and go to sleep. The fact that I stay pretty secluded is, a big deal when it comes to not having very many experiences with other people, whether they be good or bad. There are certain places in the country that you go as a scout, as a baseball scout. I traveled a lot in the South. You're driving alone through these places, and you just have these memories. It's almost like as you're driving through these places, the trees are talking to you, and it's like you have these ideas of things that have happened in the past, and these recollections of stories that you've been told, and they put a fear in you. Just like anytime you're driving, whether your registration and insurance are perfect or not, and a policeman gets behind you, there's that anxiety. So whereas I haven't had too many bad experiences, as a professional baseball player, they've been really good. People like pro baseball players. As an actor, the same thing, especially if you have a little bit of notoriety and face recognition, you avoid a lot of the bad things. But it's the feeling that you have inside that's almost like, not to be dramatic, but it's almost like a prison. It's like, no matter where you go, you kind of like feel walls closing in, that you may at some point experience something unpleasant. And, after hearing stories from my mother and seeing things happening around the country, those fears are real. And I just feel fortunate that I haven't had any really bad experiences in that regard.
Yeah. Lezlie, do you feel worried when Stephen travels?
I feel worried more when he's in the United States than I do when he's traveling, to be quite honest. Lately, before we started taping, I joked that I worry if he leaves the house, but that's not a joke. I really worry now that he will be mistaken for some other person that's done something terrible. I mean, he's already had run-ins with the police that don't make any sense whatsoever, none. One of them included me. When he was trying to pick me up from the airport, I was coming in to visit, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting. It turned out he had been stopped by a police officer because he was sitting in his car texting or using his cell phone.
When was this? Was this a long while ago?
LAX.
Yeah.
But
Recently?
A few years ago. No, what was, I can't remember why I was there, if it was for Moneyball or for the earlier one, The Rundown, which was his first actual movie. In any event, he had to do his thing, what he does, he may want to tell you himself, but he knows how to deal with the police in order not to get killed. But I just worry all the time that something like that could happen. And you can't stop worrying when every time I turn on CNN or MSNBC, I see another Black man has been killed by the police for doing absolutely nothing. So yeah, I worry.
Yeah. Now that we've discussed some realities, let's talk about some of the special destinations which focus on the Black experience in America so we can all learn as we travel. Tell us about the Martin Luther King tour in Atlanta, Lezlie.
As it happens, I could walk there for the Martin Luther King National Historic Site. It's about a quarter mile from where I live. It's a good history of, in fact, you walk past I think it's his birth home.
Yes, it is.
You can, okay, thank you. You're looking at it now?
Yes.
You can see it's got a cream color with brown trim on it or something like that. So yes, and outside of the National Historic Site is the actual tomb where he is entombed. You can't really forget that this was where he became a huge leader of the Black community, because his image is everywhere. His name is everywhere. What I'm always shocked about whenever I'm reminded of him, though, is how young he was. He was younger than our boys. He was younger than, he was 35 years old when he was assassinated. I'm always floored by it. It's a great reminder, if you're Black, of what you've been through. For little children, which I see going in on a regular basis with their teachers all the time to visit the site, it is important, I think, because I think our young people, maybe Stephen will agree or not, but I think our young people are losing the memory of what we've been through in terms of, Stephen says that he listened to what I said because I lived through it. But the next generations are losing it. Yeah.
I would just want to say that's why it's important we talk about these sites, because these are places people can learn about the experience, and we need to visit them and learn from them. And one of them is this site you're mentioning. It's also the site of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where King and his father and his grandfather served as ministers. So there's a lot there. It's on 35 acres. It's a large, large place. Now there's the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. I did visit that, and that is where, of course, the Lorraine Motel is the center of it, and that is where King was assassinated. It's quite moving to see that, and they also have all sorts of presentations of the history of the civil rights movement from the 17th century up to the present. They even have the lunch counter where the civil rights activists sat in protest in the 1950s. And it's very memorable. I recommend that to anybody to get a better feeling about the long, hard fight for civil rights. And we should mention also the Martin Luther King Memorial on the National Mall or next to it in Washington, D.C. Have you seen that one?
No, I really wanted to. I was planning a trip to Washington right before the pandemic hit to visit a friend, and also to do that because since the last time I visited her, it wasn't there. So I wanted to have her take me. But No, not yet.
Another relatively recent museum is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a Smithsonian Institution museum on the National Mall. And it opened in 2016 with a ceremony led by President Barack Obama. So yes, there are many places you can study the Black experience. I think now when people are traveling more, they're taking road trips. There are places that are wonderful to go to. One is a self-guided driving tour of the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway, which is 45 sites winding 125 miles through Maryland's eastern shore and 98 miles through Delaware before it ends in Philadelphia. And you can see all kinds of facets of Tubman's life and how her upbringing equipped her to lead 70 people at least out of slavery, including her family and friends. And she became later a spy for the Union, fighter for women's rights. And I think she should be on the $20 bill, and maybe she'll get there. Yeah.
Maybe the $100 bill.
Yeah, whatever. She needs to be on a bill. Another thing that I think we should mention, I have not seen it, I don't know you have, that's even more recent, is a very solemn name. It's called the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And it's in Montgomery, Alabama. And it's located on the site of a former warehouse where Black people were enslaved. Interesting in terms of showing the slave trade and racial terrorism in the Jim Crow South and the world's largest prison system. It is not an easy thing to watch, but the most stunning and sobering section is on a 6-acre site overlooking Montgomery. It's the National Lynching Memorial, a sacred space. Till now, there's been no national memorial acknowledging the victims of these lynchings, which are more than 4,400 known African-American men, women, and children who were hanged, burned alive, shot, drowned, and beaten to death by white mobs between 1877 and 1950. So this is an extremely important piece, like you were saying, to learn about and to go there. It would be something in travels, I think, when you're not sure where you might want to take a road trip, this might be one consideration in terms of history. What do you think of that, Lezlie, Stephen? What do you think about that, to have a museum of that
lynching
sort?
I have mixed feelings about a memorial like that. On the one hand, it's important that we understand that it's been happening all this time, and it was a routine in the recent past. But I think it maybe brushes up against a fine line between memorializing and glorifying. It's just something that goes back and forth in my mind.
Well, I know one thing, people who have gone there, who've spoken to me, have changed their whole view of America has sobered up. It's very important for some to go. I think many of us who understand it maybe don't need it as much as others who don't.
Absolutely.
Even any comments on that one?
Yeah, I'm similar. I mean, I believe it's important, but at the same time, we're quite honestly, my generation, and I'm sure the generation before me, but definitely the generation after me, are tired of seeing ourselves in that type of light. We're done with slave movies. We're done with seeing ourselves projected in that light on a regular basis, how we were abused and how we were subjugated and how we were oppressed, and how it's as important as it is to know, like my mom said, I don't need to see an entire museum of that. I'd rather see the history taught in all schools and not, have it be a place where somebody has to choose to go there.
Yeah.
And again, it is a double-edged sword because you can't forget the past. You don't, you have to remember it. It's crazy that it even happened. And that just it brings up a whole nother frustration and anger that it's something that we have to deal with because it happened for so long. We should never even had to deal with it. And now we certainly shouldn't be having to teach our children about what our ancestors went through. But at the same time, there are people, like you said, that need to know it. And it's not necessarily us. You know what I mean? And when I say us, I mean Black people. But that's why I think it should be taught in school, because, again, this is an elective place to go, and one place in a country of hundreds of millions. And I fear that not everybody who needs it is going to get the information. And,
True.
It just highlights the fact that there are certain places in the country that are continuing to try to whitewash this deplorable history from our collective consciousness. And I think that we run the risk of going back down paths that we've already traversed, and we've already unfortunately had to overcome if we don't teach young people about it and say, look, this is a dark, dark cloud over our country. And, the only way we can get out from under it is to communicate with each other, learn these histories so that we don't ever repeat them, and continue to educate the terrible experience out of our lives as a whole, not just out of our memories, but out of our behaviors and out of our teachings to our kids. I think that's,
well said.
There's too much going on where it's still being taught and the kids aren't getting it at school, that it's not right what they're being taught.
Well said. The name of the podcast is Places I Remember. Can each of you tell us one memory, good or bad, that most sticks with you in regard to your travels as a person of color? Lezlie, you want to start?
Yes. I remember, I mentioned earlier about this trip that we took down to Jackson, Mississippi. After we arrived and we did all of the receiving and schmoozing at the college, my classmates and I decided to take a walk down this main drag in Jackson. During this is so typical of college age people, but during the trip down, a romance developed between one Reed Spencer, who was a Canadian, and a ginger Canadian at that, a redheaded, freckle-faced, handsome man, and myself. So we were walking down the street. And he had his hand on, the small of my back protectively, like they used to do. I don't know if they still do that now. I remember getting in trouble in high school for having my boyfriend do that, but that's another thing. So he was doing that. And suddenly, it seemed out of nowhere, a police officer appeared. And he was almost apoplectic. Before we said one word, he was beside himself. What do you think you're doing? We're walking down the street. Now, you know me, Leah. You know that I'm not shy in any way, or fearful for that matter. But I understood what was getting ready to happen, and Reed didn't. He was clueless. He had no idea of any of this thing. So he said, what do you think we're doing? We're walking down the street, officer, just like that. Well, he explained to us with his purple face, because he was enraged, we don't do things like that down here. You take your hands off that girl. We don't do that. In fact, you need to go wherever you're going.
Wow.
In the meantime, while that was going on, another classmate who had been walking elsewhere was being thrown into a paddy wagon and taken to jail for walking down the street with a student from Tougaloo, a female. So he was, I don't even know what the charge was or what caused it, but he was actually literally thrown into the back of the paddy wagon. And Professor Alexander had to go bail him out of jail. That was only the beginning. Then we decided to go to visit the White Citizens Council. You remember that, Leah? The White Citizens Council. I lied before when I said I'm not afraid, because I was terrified. What do you mean? We can't go there. You've got me. Now, on the way down there, we'd already been declined a hotel stay in, of all places, Illinois, because they didn't allow Black people in the hotel. And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. And I stayed quiet for like the next 2 hours, just being sad, because we had to keep driving. There was no place for us to stay. Then we get down there and this has happened. It was almost as if I were white myself, but the white citizens, when they looked at me, they said to Professor Alexander, are all of your group white? And he said, oh, her, she's Hawaiian.
Oh my gosh.
Because I don't know why. Well, for your listeners, I'm light skinned. So there have been times when I've been mistaken for anything other than Black. So that worked. But then because I was so scared, I needed to go to the ladies' room. And that's when I encountered Black women and white ladies' bathrooms. So I thought, okay, now I'm passing. I'm supposed to be not Black. So I can't go into the colored restroom. So I had to go into the other one.
Oh my.
These two little old ladies almost had heart attacks when they came out of the stall and saw me standing there. That was interesting.
I'm glad that's over. At least that's over. Did you know this? Does Stephen know this story?
No.
Yeah. Not a good story. Yeah. What about you, Stephen? Have you any memory that sticks with you?
I was in the Dominican. There's a couple, and they're short. I was in the Dominican, and I was talking to my cab driver. I noticed that they had, but I knew before I had ever been because I played baseball with Dominicans, and they have what looked to be Black Dominicans. Like they look like African American or African people. They look like Black people. And they have Dominicans that are more fair skinned with straighter hair and look more Latino. And I asked them if they have racism or colorism in their country, because, I come from America and we deal with discrimination and we have these biases towards each other that, I wonder, do you guys have here? I mean, do the darker skinned Dominicans get treated differently or better or worse than the lighter skinned Dominicans? And the guy said, no, we're all Dominicans. And I thought that was a really cool answer to hear. We don't see that. We're just all Dominicans. Whether that's true or not, I only got to ask that one person. I didn't go do a poll around the island, but It was cool for that one guy to say it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and it wasn't a bad experience, but it was an experience of one of those fearful things. I was at a restaurant and having good conversation with some guys that I had just met at the sushi bar, and we were just talking, and they invited me to go to some party that was away from where my hotel was, maybe 40-minute drive away. And I was like, I'll give you guys a call. We exchanged information, and I'm like, we'll talk about it. Yeah, it sounds fun. I'll check it out. But as the night went on and the time for me to go started to approach, I started being, my gut was like, no, this is not a good idea. You don't know these people. It's 40 minutes away from the hotel. You're in a place where racism was just rampant and vicious. Everybody may not have gotten over it. Yeah, you probably shouldn't do this. So I pulled out. I didn't, I ended up not going. And it was, they could have been nice guys, you know what I mean? But they also could have been trying to lure me into something that was bad for my existence. And that's what I felt. I was like, these guys are trying to trick me. These guys are trying to pull me into something that's going to get me killed.
Wow.
So, and it was all based on fear and anxiety and reputation. You know what I mean? So that's an experience that still kind of sticks with me as a kind of a negative experience, not negative so much from the outside stimulus, but negative in the fact that I had to live through and think through that type of a what if situation. And it wasn't fun. And it kind of shook my spirit a little bit in my outlook on humanity. You know what I mean? It was like, man, I don't trust people. And that was kind of a shakeup for me. It was like, man, you're supposed to trust people until they give you a reason not to. But there was just a strong, strong feeling in me that was like, this is not in your best interest. And that was disappointing. It was disappointing that the world had shaped me to believe that certain people were out to do me harm.
Yes, I hear you. Lezlie, Stephen, I want to thank you both for sharing your experiences. We need to continue dialogues like this, and we all need to open our hearts and our minds as we travel the world and as we go about our lives. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to our award-winning podcast. We've recorded over 100 episodes of Places I Remember, so follow us on any podcast app. And new monthly episodes are also on YouTube with gorgeous video. My book, Places I Remember, is available in print and Kindle, and I read the audio version. Follow my travel writing at Forbes.com. Contact me at the links in the show notes or on my website, placesiremember, lealane.com, and keep making your own travel memories.